Hello, I'm Mr. Haynes, and this is Prove the Pythagorean Theorem. Standard, 8th grade geometry number 6. Explain a proof of the Pythagorean Theorem and its converse. Prior knowledge needed is exponents and radicals. Let's first talk about the parts of a right triangle. The legs form a right triangle. Notice that the legs are perpendicular. The legs are also labeled A and B in the Pythagorean theorem. Hypotenuse. The hypotenuse is the longest side. It is opposite the right angle, and the hypotenuse is labeled C in the Pythagorean theorem. Notice that angles and vertices use a capital letter and sides use a lowercase letter. Angles and the side opposite have the same letter. As you see, vertex capital A is opposite side lowercase a. The Pythagorean theorem states the sum of the squares of the legs of a right triangle is equal to the square of the hypotenuse. Simply stated, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. The Pythagorean theorem only works for right triangles. It can be used to find the length of any missing side as long as the other two sides are known. The Pythagorean theorem labels A and B as the legs and C as the hypotenuse. It does not matter which leg is labeled A or B as long as C is always the hypotenuse. Using the Pythagorean theorem. The Pythagorean theorem can be used in a simplified form to solve for leg A, leg B, or the hypotenuse C. To solve for side C, you take the square root of A squared plus B squared. To solve for side A, you take the square root of C squared minus B squared. And to solve for side B, you take the square root of C squared minus A squared. Depth of knowledge number 1. What is the knowledge? I can apply the converse of the Pythagorean theorem to determine if a triangle is a right triangle. A triangle has side lengths of 17, 13, and 22 units. Is this a right triangle? Explain. The converse of the Pythagorean theorem is if the square of the length of the longest side of a triangle is equal to the sum of the squares of the other two sides, then the triangle is a right triangle. So to solve this problem, we take our Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, and substitute the values. We substitute 13 for A, 17 for B, and 22 for C, since 22 is the longest length. Using a calculator, we find the squares of these numbers. 13 squared is 169. 17 squared is 289. And 22 squared is 484. So if we add 169 plus 289, it should equal 484 in order for this to be a right triangle. Well, 169 plus 289 is 458, which is not equal to 484. So is this a right triangle? No. A triangle with side lengths 17, 13, and 22 units does not create a right triangle. This is not a right triangle because the converse of the Pythagorean theorem states that if the square of one side of a triangle is equal to the sum of the squares of the other two sides, then the triangle is a right triangle. Since 13 squared plus 17 squared does not equal 22 squared, the triangle is not a right triangle. Extension. For the first two problems, find the missing side of each triangle. Round your answers to the nearest tenth if necessary. For problems 3 and 4, state if the three side lengths form a right triangle. Prove the Pythagorean theorem, Part 2. Standard, 8th grade geometry number 6. Explain a proof of the Pythagorean theorem and its converse. Prior knowledge needed, exponents, and radicals. Depth of knowledge number 2. How can the knowledge be used? I can apply and explain the Pythagorean theorem converse in real-world context to solve problems. The distance between Los Angeles and San Francisco is 382 miles. The distance between Los Angeles and Salt Lake City is 688 miles. Lastly, the distance between Salt Lake City and San Francisco is 786 miles. Do the three cities form a right triangle? Explain both mathematically and verbally. Once again, the converse of the Pythagorean theorem is if the square of the length of the longest side of a triangle is equal to the sum of the squares of the other two sides, then the triangle is a right triangle. So we will use our Pythagorean theorem again, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, and substitute the values. We substitute 382 for a, 688 for b, and 786 for c, since 786 miles is the longest length. Using a calculator, we find their squares. 382 squared is 145,924. 688 squared is 473,344. And 786 squared is 617,796. So if we add the first two values together, they should equal c. But when we add the first two values together, we get 619,268, which is not equal to c squared, which is 617,796. So do these cities form a right triangle? No, the three cities do not form a right triangle. The three cities do not form a right triangle because the converse of the Pythagorean theorem states that if the square of one side of a triangle is equal to the sum of the squares of the other two sides, then the triangle is a right triangle. Since 382 squared plus 688 squared does not equal 786 squared, the three cities do not form a right triangle. Well, I hope you enjoyed this lesson, and be sure to always practice math.